Okay, so today I'm going to be running through a quick model builder explanation of how to do the suitability analysis using ArcGIS, using the reclassify tool and the weighted overlay tool. Basically, here we have the state of Puebla. And what we want to do is figure out what areas in the state of Puebla would be most favorable to have basically a working forest or forest property for timber harvest. And so we have some various different inputs that we can look at to help us make that decision. The first one we have is vegetation potential. And so I'll turn this layer on, and we'll see these different colors signify different types of vegetation. And if you look here, the orange here signifies kind of like a pine forest, or a more evergreen, more high altitude type of forest. The purple here is kind of a cloud forest type vegetation, and below that here in this kind of turquoise is an evergreen tropical forest, evergreen subtropical forest. And then over here in this kind of brighter green color we have kind of it's more of a shrub, drier environment. And then also as well in this other color here is kind of a drier type forest area. And then this kind of like this other color here is an area that's aquatic, that would not be suitable for forestry. So this is basically the different types of vegetation. We also have some other layers. One is altitude. So the areas in the darker areas here signify areas of lower elevation, and the lighter to white areas signify higher elevation. The other one we have is, this is an area that shows the slope. So if I zoom in here, you can see that the areas that are more black are lower, they are more flat, and the areas that are more that are whiter or in the lighter gray colors are more inclined. The other one that I have here is that's important when you're thinking about timber harvest is a distance from roads. And so we have this here. This is a Euclidean. I use the Euclidean distance tool to determine distance from roads. And if you see here, there's the roads. And then the areas in dark mean that they're closer to the roads, and as it gets lighter, you get further away. So basically, I pulled all those into this model here. If you look at this model, so here in blue you have all of the inputs, and these inputs are basically the vegetation, the distance from roads, the altitude, and the slope. And so then what you have to do is you have to be able to look at all of these in the same layer, or in the same frame of reference, as far as like a value. And so the tool that helps you do that is the reclassification tool. So if you look here, I'll open up this one first. These are the different types of vegetation that we have, and then I reclassified them, giving them a value of between 1 and 5 based on their available use, or their how good that area is for forestry. is just based on expert opinion. And so the areas that are the evergreen tropical forest or the cloud forest areas are considered 5, and then the area that is the evergreen forest is considered 4. The more pine associated forest is 4, and then on down to 1 for the aquatic. And so then also going down through some of the other ones, this is looking at distance from roads. So for between 0 and 1,000 meters from a road is considered to be a 5. Between 1,000 and 2,500 would be a 4. And then so more than, so like between 2,500 and 5,000 meters would be a 3. And so that like the further that you get from a road, the less favorable that area is for timber harvest, or for actually having a business run based on timber harvest. The other one that we look at here is altitude. And Puebla has quite a variation in altitude, all the way up to over 5,000 meters. And so those areas are not considered very good. Between 3,000 and 5,000 really are not considered very favorable for forestry. So those are given a 1. But between the lowest available value and 2,000, we gave those a 5 because that area is considered to be more high value altitude range for forestry. The other one we looked at is the slope, the landscape, and basically if you have a really steep area, such as all the way up to 82% slope, you have it's not a very good area as far as getting into the area and actually cutting the trees and doing the timber harvest, because then you open it up to a lot of erosion possibilities. But some of the more flat areas, or that are less inclined, would be much more valuable as far as the ease of harvesting. So we gave those a 5. And so then there's kind of varying levels of levels in between there. So basically we take all these together, and then so those reclassifies all run and then go into these outputs here. And these outputs are then put into the weighted overlay. And the weighted overlay basically takes the inputs, and then you give a percent influence to those inputs. So I have the 4 different inputs here, and I gave the vegetation potential the highest influence of 50%, because if you don't have the vegetation, the other ones aren't going to matter as much. So then the other things that we took into account were the altitude, and then the slope, and then the distance from roads. And so once we run that, and that weighted overlay runs, it puts out one raster image. And so I'll pull that raster image up here so that we can see it. And so basically this raster image gives you values from 2 to 5, 2 being the lowest value areas for timber harvest, 3 being kind of medium low, 4 being starting to look good, it's favorable for timber harvest, and then 5 being the most favorable areas for timber harvest, and based on our criteria. And so if you look here at the roads, you'll see that some of these areas in blue are connected to roads, and they're also in really favorable zones as far as the vegetation type. But if you look over here in this area, you'll see that this zone, although the zone in general isn't as favorable, because of the fact that those areas are close to roads, then that area becomes more favorable for timber harvest. And you'll also see that the areas that are excluded from or are less favorable are considered to be the higher elevations, kind of shown in here in this kind of white or blue color. And then also areas that we know, based on the vegetation type, that that vegetation is not favorable for timber harvest. And so we can play around inside this, the weighted overlay tool. We can play around with changing around some of the percent influences. And we can also change within the reclassification. We can go in and change the different basically the different values. Say like a different altitude was considered more highly valuable, and we could go in here and change the values using this classify tool. And we could change if we found out through a certain study that like one area of elevation was more favorable than another, we could use that data, and then we could basically change accordingly to make the model track those types of values more closely. And so this has been kind of just an overview of the weighted overlay tool. And so I hope to use it again, use it more in the future, and refine this model and others for looking at natural resources.